Okay, let's unpack this. We often talk about barriers on this show, technological barriers, scientific ones, the limits of space or AI.
Mm-hmm.
But today, I want to bring it right back down to earth, literally, down to the cinders and the dirt. I want to talk about a barrier that was just purely, viscerally human, a number that haunted the world of sports and really the public imagination for 9 long years.
You are, of course, talking about the 4-minute mile.
Exactly, 4 minutes. It's funny when you say it out loud now, it sounds almost arbitrary.
Right. I mean, you have high school kids breaking it now, occasionally.
Right. It's just 4 laps of a track, 60 seconds each. A nice, neat round number. But in the early 1950s, this wasn't just a time on a stopwatch. It was a brick wall. It was the Everest of running.
That is the perfect analogy. Before Hillary and Norgay, Everest was this sort of ultimate physical limit of the Earth.
Yeah.
And before 1954, the 4-minute mile felt like the physical limit of the human engine. Or, that's what people thought.
And the man who finally climbed it wasn't some professional athlete living in a high-altitude training camp with a whole team of nutritionists.
No, he was a medical student. A medical student who spent his morning sharpening his own spikes on a grindstone and then went and worked his shift at a hospital.
That's the juxtaposition that we are really going to explore today. We're looking at the life of Sir Roger Bannister.
Mm-hmm.
And while the world remembers him for those 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds, our sources just paint this picture of a man who was so much more complex than just a runner.
He was a really distinguished neurologist, a master of an Oxford college, and this is the key thing. He was someone who actually valued his contribution to medicine more than breaking that world record.
It's just mind-boggling. Imagine breaking one of the most famous records in human history, becoming a global icon, and then later in life basically saying, yeah, that running thing was interesting, but have you seen my research on the autonomic nervous system?
It really stands out in all the research. It gives you such a different perspective on the man.
It does. So our mission for this deep dive is kind of twofold. First, we really need to understand the how. How does a full-time medical student with what we would now consider, truly minimal training, how does he shatter a barrier that had stopped the world's best runners since 1945?
Right. We need to get into the weeds of his training versus the competition.
And second, we have to look beyond the finish line. We need to look at the rivalry that pushed him there, specifically with the Australian John Landy, and the fact that his record, this impossible record, only lasted 46 days.
Only 46 days. It's an amazing detail.
And then, of course, we have to cover the 60-year medical career that followed, because if you only know the 3.59.4 part of the story, you really don't know Roger Bannister at all.
Not at all.
So let's rewind the tape. Before all the fame, before the knighthood, where does a guy like this even come from? Was he just, born with wings on his heels?
Not exactly. He was born in Harrow, London in 1929. His parents, Ralph and Alice, were working-class people, originally from Lancashire. His father worked in the civil service, so, a very humble beginning.
And the backdrop of his childhood wasn't sport. It was war.
Exactly. World War II kicks off when he's just a kid, about 10 years old.
Right.
And like so many children in London at the time, the family was evacuated to try and avoid the Blitz. They ended up moving to Bath.
Okay.
And there's this harrowing detail in the source material that really, I think, it sets the stage for his resilience later on. It wasn't just that they moved, the war sort of followed them.
This is the story about the bombing raid, the basement.
That's the one, yes. During a bombing raid on Bath, their family house was severely damaged. The Bannisters were all sheltering in the basement at the time, and the house literally crumbled above them.
That is just terrifying. Talk about a formative memory. You're sitting in the dark, the whole earth is shaking, and your home is being destroyed just upstairs.
It really puts the pressure of a foot race into perspective, doesn't it?
I'd say so.
When you survive something like that as a child, the sound of a starter's pistol probably doesn't induce the same level of panic it might for other people. But it was also in Bath, amidst all this chaos, that he discovered he could run. He went to the City of Bath Boys School.
And he just finds out he has a talent for it.
He did, yeah. He won the Junior Cross Country Cup 3 times in a row. But you have to picture what this was. It wasn't the refined technical running we see on tracks today. It was raw.
Like just running through the mud?
Exactly. He describes just running through mud, running to school, running away from air raid sirens. It was primal, almost.
But he wasn't exactly a prodigy in the modern track and field sense, right? Because I read something that just floored me. When he started running seriously at Oxford in 1946, he was 17, and get this, he had never worn running spikes or even run on a track before.
That's completely correct. He arrives at Oxford to study medicine, and in terms of track and field, he's a total novice. The equipment, the technique, he'd never set foot on a cinder track.
Yeah.
He was running on pure instinct and just a massive natural engine.
And this is where we have to talk about the culture of the time. Because if you were a talented kid today, you'd be in a development academy by age 12. You'd have a sponsor.
Oh, absolutely. But the 1940s and 50s were the era of the amateur ideal, or the gentleman amateur, as it was often called. In Britain especially, there was this really strong cultural belief that sport was something you did alongside your actual life, not as your life.
So to be a professional, to be like obsessed with it, that was almost seen as a bit vulgar.
Exactly. The goal was to be effortlessly good.
Right.
You're supposed to study for your degree, maybe have a sherry with your tutor, and then just pop out and go broke a record before dinner. And Bannister really embodied this. In 1947, just a year after starting at Oxford, he ran a mile in 4 minutes and 24.6 seconds.
Which is an incredibly respectable time for someone with basically no formal background.
Very respectable. What's fascinating here is the training volume, or really the lack of it, that got him there.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the research. Today's elite runners are doing, what, 100 miles a week? Double days? Sleeping in oxygen tents?
Easily. 100 to 120 miles a week is pretty standard for a base phase.
Okay, so what was Bannister doing?
In 1947, he was training for only 3 half-hour sessions per week.
3 half hours. That's 90 minutes of running per week.
Oh, yes.
That's a sitcom episode. That is nothing.
It creates such a stark contrast with modern athletics. It really emphasizes that raw talent we mentioned. But it also highlights his constraints. I mean, he was a medical student at Oxford. The curriculum was brutal. He didn't have time to run 100 miles a week.
So he had to make every minute count.
He had to be efficient. But even with that incredibly light training, he was talented enough that he was being considered as a possible for the 1948 Olympic team in London.
And he was, what, 19?
Just a teenager. The selectors were definitely looking at him. But Bannister did something very mature for his age. He turned it down.
He said no to the Olympics in his home city.
He did. He felt he wasn't ready. He thought he was too young, didn't have the foundation. So instead, he watched the 1948 games from the stands. And that was the spark. Seeing the Olympics right there in London inspired him to target the 1952 games in Helsinki. He decided to play the long game.
So he spends the next 4 years building up. And by 1951, he's crushing it. He wins the big domestic race, the AAA championships. He beats the defending champion in front of like 47,000 people. He's the guy to beat.
He was. And he started incorporating more structure into his training. He was heavily influenced by a coach named Franz Stampfel, who is a legend in track circles.
And Stampfel introduced interval training.
Exactly.
Can you break that down for us? What is interval training compared to just, going for a run?
Well, instead of just running 5 miles at a steady pace, you break it up. You run, say, 400 meters, 1 lap, very, very fast. Then you rush for a couple of minutes. Then you do again. You might do that 10 times.
And what does that do for you?
It teaches the body to handle high intensity and to clear the metabolic waste products, like lactic acid, that build up in the muscles. And Bannister, being a scientist, he understood the physiology of this. He loved it. He also adopted things like block periodization and even did fell running on rough terrain to build strength.
So 1952 rolls around, Helsinki Olympics. This is supposed to be his moment. He saved his energy. He skipped other races to be fresh. He's the favorite. What happened?
Well, this is one of those moments where, administrative decisions can completely change history.
Oh, no.
Bannister had trained for a very specific rhythm of competition. He was training for a heat and then a final. But at the last minute, because of the number of entrants, the organizers added semifinals for the 1,500 meters.
Why does that matter so much? I mean, a race is a race, right? If you're the fastest, you just win.
Not at this level, and not with his particular training background. Remember his low-volume training.
To 3 half hours a week.
Right. That high-intensity, low-volume approach gave him incredible speed and power like a turbo engine. But he lacked the deep aerobic base, the mileage, that allows a runner to recover really quickly between hard efforts.
So his tank was small. He could empty it once in spectacular fashion, but he couldn't refill it overnight.
That's a perfect way to put it. The runners who were doing 80 or 90 miles a week, they had the aerobic capacity to run a hard heat, wake up feeling fine, run a hard semifinal, and still be fresh for the final. Bannister didn't. That extra race, the semifinals, it just drained him.
So by the time he gets to the final, he's running on fumes.
He qualified, but he said he felt blown and unhappy. His legs were heavy. And in the final, he finished fourth. He actually set a new British record of 3.46.36, which is objectively a very fast time, but he missed the podium.
Fourth place. That has to be just devastating. You spend 4 years focused on one single thing, you execute your plan, and then because of a schedule change, you come home with nothing. The worst place to finish.
It is heartbreaking for him. The sources say he seriously considered quitting running entirely. For 2 months, he just deliberated. The press was really hard on him. He felt humiliated.
God, he didn't quit.
He didn't. And this is the pivot. That failure, that heartbreak, it became the fuel. He realized he needed a new goal, a singular goal, one that didn't depend on heats and semifinals and Olympic committees.
A 4-minute mile.
Precisely. The Olympics were gone. But that 4-minute barrier was still there, just taunting everyone.
So let's talk about this barrier for a second. You mentioned it had stood for 9 years. I know some Swedish runners had gotten really close back in the 40s. Gunder Hägg ran 4.01.4, but then it just stalled. Nothing. Why do people think it was actually impossible?
Well, this is where we have to clarify a bit of a myth. There's a common story, you hear it in motivational speeches all the time, that scientists and doctors claim the human heart would literally explode or your lungs would collapse if someone ran under 4 minutes.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. The deadly barrier.
It makes for a great story, but Bannister himself debunked this in his memoirs. I mean, he was a medical student. He knew the physiology.
Right.
Informed observers didn't think it was physically impossible in that way.
Yeah.
The heart's a muscle, a pump. It doesn't just explode because you run 1% faster.
So it was more of a mental block.
It was partly mental and partly circumstantial. The record had stood since 1945, largely because World War II had just completely interrupted athletic progress and training for so many countries. Nutrition was poor, tracks were bad, and then you have 4 minutes. It's a nice, round, psychologically daunting number. It just sat there, slightly out of reach. You'd see runners get to 4.02 and just subconsciously tighten up.
But by 1953, the siege was on. It wasn't just Bannister thinking about it.
No, the world was waking up. You had Wes Santee in the U.S., and of course John Landy in Australia.
The rivals.
Yes, and the clock was ticking. In June 1953, Wes Santee, who's a bit of a cowboy, very confident, he ran a 4.02.4.
Okay, getting closer.
Then later that year, John Landy ran 4.02.0, and Landy was a machine. He was running these sorts of times consistently. Bannister knew he wasn't just racing a stopwatch, he was racing these other men on the other side of the globe.
And Bannister himself had a couple of, practice runs at the record, didn't he? I read about one where he actually ran a 4.02.0, but it didn't count.
Yes, that was in June 1953. It was a fascinating moment involving what they called artificial circumstances.
What does that mean?
Well, his friend Chris Brasher, who we will definitely hear more about later, had jogged the first part of the race with the intention of being laughed, so he could then act as a fresh pacemaker for Bannister later on.
Oh, like a ringer. And the officials didn't like that.
They hated it. They said, no, that's not a real competitive race. That's a setup. You can't just have a fresh runner jump in and pull you along. So the time was disallowed. No record.
And Bannister's reaction? Was he furious?
Quite the opposite. He was actually relieved. He said something like, my feeling as I look back is one of great relief that I did not run a 4-minute mile under such artificial circumstances.
He wanted it to be clean.
He wanted it to be pure. Which brings us to 1954. The tension is just ratcheting up. Landy is in Australia, running 4.02s for fun, it seems. And he's about to come to Europe for the summer racing season. Bannister knows he has to strike before Landy gets there.
He needs to be first.
And that leads us to May 6, 1954. Iffley Road Track, Oxford. It's a small meet between the British AAA and Oxford University. This is the date Bannister had circled on his calendar.
Now, if you were writing a movie script about this, you'd make it a beautiful sunny day, birds chirping, perfect conditions.
Of course.
But reality was miserable.
It was typical British weather. It was cold, it was wet, and it was windy. There were 25-mile-per-hour winds just gusting across the track.
And for a runner, wind is the ultimate enemy. It costs you so much more energy running into it than you ever get back running with it.
Absolutely. Bannister almost pulled out. He spent the afternoon just watching the trees sway, debating whether to waste his peak fitness on a day where the record just seemed physically impossible because of the drag.
But this is the part that I love, the doctor detail. Before he even heads to the track to make history, while he is stressing about the wind, what is he actually doing?
He's at St. Mary's Hospital in London, doing his rounds. He's working. He treated patients that morning.
That is just wild to me. It's like, hold on, let me just check this patient's vitals, then I'll pop over and break a world record.
It completely reinforces the duality of his life. And think about his race preparation. He sharpened his own running spikes that morning in the hospital lab. He found a grindstone and literally sharpened the metal pins himself.
And he did something else to the shoes, didn't he? With graphite.
Yes. He rubbed graphite on the spikes.
Why graphite? What's the science there?
It was to stop the cinder ash from the tracks sticking to the shoes. Cinder tracks were made of crushed ash and rock. When they got wet, they became heavy and sticky. So if you pick up even an ounce of that wet cinder on each shoe, over a mile, that's thousands of steps. That's a massive amount of extra energy you're expending. He was using basic chemistry to minimize friction and weight.
A true scientist-athlete. So he takes a mid-morning train from Paddington to Oxford, watching the flags just whipping in the wind, worrying about this gale. He meets his teammates. Who were they?
There was a team effort, and we really cannot overstate the role of his casemakers. It was Chris Brasher, a steeplechaser, and Chris Chataway, a long-distance specialist. They had a very clear plan to pace him for the first 3 laps.
Okay, so they all get to the track. It's almost 6:00 p.m. The wind is still howling.
And then, a small miracle. Just before the start time, the wind died down. Bannister looked up at the flag on a nearby church, St. John the Evangelist, and it just went limp. That was the sign. He decided to go for it.
Okay, walk us through the race. The gun goes off. What happens?
Bannister immediately tucks in right behind Chris Brasher. The first lap is all Brasher. He hits the quarter-mile mark in 58 seconds.
Whoa. 58 seconds? That's fast. Maybe too fast?
Bannister actually shouted faster at him because his own adrenaline was distorting his sense of time. But Brasher, to his credit, held steady. He knew the pace. They hit the half-mile mark 2 laps down in 1 minute 58 seconds.
Okay, that's perfect pacing. That's a 59-second per lap average. Right on the money.
Exactly. Then as they start the third lap, Brasher is completely exhausted. He starts to drift wide. And Chris Chataway sprints past to take over the lead. Bannister follows Chataway.
And this is usually the hardest lap, isn't it? The third lap is where dreams go to die. It's where the lactic acid really starts to burn.
It's the crucial psychological phase of the race. And Chataway runs his heart out to keep the pace high. They come around to the bell meaning 1 lap to go at 3 minutes and 1 second.
Okay, so do the math for us. He needs to run that final lap in 59 seconds or less.
He has to fly, and fly he did. With about 275 yards to go, Bannister decides he can't wait any longer. He just launches his famous kick. He surges past Chataway. The sources describe him running with this feeling of complete detachment, just forcing his body to override all the pain signals.
He tears down the back straight, hits that final bend. The crowd is just screaming.
He crosses the line and literally collapses into the arms of the officials. He was totally, completely spent. He said later he felt like his body was exploding.
And then, the moment that everyone remembers, the announcement.
Norse McWhorter was the announcer. And a fun fact, he later went on to co-found the Guinness Book of Records, so this guy knew a thing or two about stats.
Perfect man for the job.
And he knew how to build the drama. He started this long, drawn-out preamble about all the records being broken.
He's listing everything. A new Oxford University record, a new British record.
A European record, an empire record, a world record. He really milked it for all it was worth. And then he finally got to the numbers. He said, the time was 3.
And that's all anyone heard. Just absolute chaos.
The roar of the crowd was so loud it completely drowned out the rest of the numbers. Nobody heard the 59.4. The word 3 was all that mattered. The barrier was broken.
It still gives me chills just thinking about it. It's one of the defining moments of the 20th century. But here's the kicker, and this is something I think a lot of people forget or maybe never knew. He didn't hold that record for very long.
No, he did not. And this connects right back to that rivalry we mentioned earlier. Remember John Landy?
The Australian machine. The guy running 4.02s in his sleep.
Just 46 days later, 46, Landy ran 3.57.9 in Turku, Finland.
That is just brutal. You do the impossible, you become a global legend, and a month and a half later, some guy on the other side of the world says, anything you can do, I can do a second and a half better.
He smashed Bannister's record.
Yeah.
It wasn't even close.
So now the whole narrative flips. Bannister was the first, but Landy is clearly the fastest. Who's actually the best?
The world needed to know. And this set the stage for the ultimate showdown. the Miracle Mile at the British Empire and Commonwealth Games in Vancouver in August of 1954.
This is the heavyweight fight. The first time the two sub-4 men ever meet on the same track. The height must have been completely unreal.
It was. And the race dynamics were so fascinating because their styles were complete opposites. Landy was a frontrunner. He liked to push the pace early and just break his opponent's will.
And Bannister was the kicker.
He was the kicker. He relied on that final burst of speed, that anaerobic power we talked about earlier.
So the gun goes off. Does Landy stick to his script?
Oh, he does. He takes off like a shot. He runs the first lap incredibly fast. By the third lap, he had opened up a gap of 10, maybe 15 yards on Bannister.
10 yards is a huge lead at that speed. It must have looked like Bannister was done for.
To most people watching, it did. But Bannister kept his cool. He knew if he panicked and sprinted too early to try and catch up, he'd burn out completely. So he just slowly reeled Landy in, inch by inch.
And then, on the final bend, we get one of the most famous moments in all of sports history. The moment that's now immortalized in bronze.
We'll look back.
Set the scene for us. They're coming off that final turn.
Landy is still in the lead.
Yay.
But the crowd noise is just deafening, and he can't hear footsteps behind him. He gets anxious. He needs to know where Bannister is. So he glances over his left shoulder to check.
And Bannister.
Bannister passed him on the right at that exact split second.
Oh, that is just painful. It's a lesson for life, isn't it? Never look back.
The mechanics of it are that when you turn your head, your shoulder drops. You lose a tiny fraction of momentum. And that fraction of a second cost Landy the race. Bannister surged past and won in 3.58.8. Landy finished just behind in 3.59.6.
So they both broke 4 minutes again in the same race.
Yes. It was the first time two men had ever broken 4 minutes in the same race. But Bannister won the title. He was the champion.
And there's actually a statue of this moment in Vancouver, right?
There is. It captures that exact instant. Landy looking back over his shoulder while Bannister surges past. And Landy, who was an absolute gentleman about the whole thing, had a wonderful quote about it.
What'd he say?
He said, "While Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt for looking back, I am probably the only one ever turned into bronze for looking back."
That is some top-tier self-deprecation. I really like this Landy guy.
It was a very gentlemanly rivalry. They remained friends for their entire lives. But after this amazing season, after becoming the first sub-4 man, winning the Miracle Mile, winning the European title, Bannister did something that would be absolutely unthinkable for a modern superstar athlete.
He quit.
He retired, late in 1954. He was at the absolute peak of his powers, arguably the most famous athlete on the planet. And he just hung up his spikes to focus on his medical career.
I mean, can you imagine Usain Bolt retiring immediately after his first Olympics to go work in an office? It doesn't happen now.
It really reinforces that amateur ideal we were talking about. Bannister felt he had achieved what he set out to do in running. He had explored his physical limits. Now he wanted to achieve something in medicine.
So let's talk about Dr. Bannister, because he wasn't just, a GP at the local clinic. He wasn't just trading on his famous name. He became a real heavy hitter in the field of neurology.
Absolutely. He dedicated the next 40 years of his life to medicine. He specialized in the autonomic nervous system.
Which is what, exactly?
It's the part of your nervous system that controls all the automatic functions of your body. Things like heart rate, blood pressure, digestion. He specifically focused on autonomic failure conditions, where those automatic systems stop working correctly.
And he basically wrote the book on it.
He literally wrote the book on it. He edited a textbook called Autonomic Failure. He published over 80 scientific papers. He became the Master of Pembroke College at Oxford. This was a hugely significant academic career.
And when people would ask him, and I'm sure they asked him constantly, what are you most proud of, the mile or your medical work? What did he say?
He was incredibly consistent on this point. He stated explicitly that he was prouder of his medical contributions than the 4-minute mile. He famously said, "I worked in medicine for 60 years. I ran for about 8.
That is such a powerful perspective. We, the public, we obsess over the 4-minute sports moment, but for him, the real marathon was the decades of research.
He viewed the running as a phase of his youth, an exploration. But medicine was his life's work.
And he still served the sport in other ways, right?
He did. He became the first chairman of the Sports Council, which is now known as Sport England. And here is a crucial contribution that often gets overlooked. He initiated the first testing for anabolic steroids.
Oh, wow. So he was a pioneer in anti-doping, too.
He was. This is in the 1970s. He saw the direction sport was heading. He saw the rise of chemical enhancement.
Yeah.
And remembering his own amateur ethos, sharpening your own spikes and running on pure determination, he wanted to protect the integrity of the sport. He really pushed for testing.
He wanted to keep it about the human engine, not the chemistry lab.
Precisely. And he was knighted for his services in 1975, not just for the running, but for his service to the Sports Council and to medicine.
Now, in what seems like a particularly cruel twist of irony, the neurologist who spent his life studying the nervous system eventually faced a neurological battle of his own.
Yes. In 2011, Sir Roger Bannister was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
That must have been incredibly difficult for someone who understood exactly what was happening inside his own body on a cellular level.
He spoke about it with remarkable dignity. He didn't complain. He approached it with that same analytical mind he applied to his running and his research. He passed away in 2018 at the age of 88.
But his legacy, the 4-minute mile is still the benchmark for a middle-distance runner. Even the pros today are way, way faster. Breaking 4 is still that rite of passage.
It absolutely is. It's the gold standard of the mile. Just recently, in May of 2024, on the 70th anniversary of the record, a group of runners converged on the Iffley Road track again to celebrate.
I saw that. And 4 guys broke 4 minutes in that one anniversary race.
Yes, the winner ran 3.56. It just shows how the standard has shifted over time. But if you look at the current world record, it's held by Hicham El Garouj of Morocco. His time is 3.43.13.
3:43. That's over 16 seconds faster than Bannister.
It is.
16 seconds is an eternity in a mile race. That's almost 100 meters. It's a different race entirely.
It is. But you can't compare them directly. It doesn't diminish Bannister's achievement one bit. You have to compare the contexts. El Garouj is a full-time professional athlete. He ran on these bouncy synthetic tracks that are engineered to return energy to the legs. He had paid pacemakers whose only job was to hit exact splits. He had modern nutrition, shoe technology, carbon plates, super foams.
And Bannister was running on wet cinders and 25-mile-per-hour winds with leather spikes. He sharpened himself in a hospital lab.
After training 3 times a week during his lunch break.
Exactly. It's apples and oranges.
The meaning of Bannister's mile isn't that it was the fastest time forever. It's that he was the first. He proved it could be done. He broke the psychological ceiling. Before him, it was a wall. After him, it was a door. And then everyone started running through it.
So what does this all mean for us? Why are we still talking about a guy running in circles 70 years ago?
I think it comes down to the purity of the effort. It really represents a time when excellence in sport was just one facet of a well-rounded life. Bannister wasn't defined solely by his running.
Perspective. He had a backup plan. Or rather, running was the backup plan to his life.
Precisely. And he showed that limits, whether it's 4 minutes or something else in our own lives, are often just these constructs in our minds just waiting to be dismantled by someone brave enough to try.
That's a great takeaway. It's about redefining what you think is impossible.
And doing it with a certain amount of grace.
Well, we've covered the wet track in Oxford, the look back in Vancouver, and the corridors of the neurology ward. It's been quite a journey.
A journey from a bombed-out basement in Bath all the way to history books.
Before we wrap up, here's a final thought for you to chew on. We talked about that statue of John Landy looking back. In life and in a race, looking back at your competition usually slows you down. That's the obvious lesson.
Right.
But think about Bannister's own valuation of his life. We celebrate the 3 minutes and 59 seconds. But he celebrated the 60 years of patient, quiet, methodical medical research.
It really raises the question. Which requires more endurance? The 4-minute explosion of speed that captures the world's attention for a moment, or the 60-year marathon of quiet dedication that actually improves lives?
If you're curious to dig deeper, maybe skip the running videos for a minute and look up autonomic failure to see what Sir Roger really cared about. Or if you just want the thrill, go watch the footage of the Miracle Mile and catch that split second where Landy turns his head. It's pure cinema. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.